Great. Welcome everyone to the Africa Early Stage Summit Investor Summit hosted by VC4A and ABAN. Really excited today to have a panel discussion to explore the current opportunity for Africa to potentially become the VC investment destination of the next decade. And to unpack this a bit more, I've got a great panel of really experienced and well-known investors from all around the world. Mariam Dieng from the global lead for innovation at 500 Global, Rio Yamawaki, the general partner of Keppel Africa Fund, and Alberto Anton, an associate in the Plug and Play Center. So I think we can all agree that for a multitude of reasons, 2021 has been a record-breaking year for the African VC ecosystem, with startups raising nearly $3 billion already year to date. The number of African unicorns growing exponentially in 2021, and more global VCs writing first checks into the Africa ecosystem. So I guess the point we're going to discuss today is, do all these factors indicate that the African tech ecosystem is potentially ready to become the next preeminent destination for global VC investment? Maybe just to kick off, to start with you, Mariam, what in your view are the key challenges we will all need to overcome for Africa to potentially become the preeminent VC destination of the next decade?
Thank you, Nivesh. And I think that, as you've just mentioned, this year has been a record-breaking for the continent in terms of the amount of VC funding that startups have fundraised, and so therefore that has only comforted the interest and the opportunity that everyone can agree has been witnessed on the continent and continues to grow. Now, I think it's also important to think about what the challenges are from the perspective of not necessarily what is preventing startups from performing, because I think we can all agree that the startups are definitely performing, which is why we're seeing an increase in VC funding. But I think the real question is, how can we better support the startups to make Africa a viable market for innovation, as well as make it a sustainable market for innovation? And so far, a lot of what we're seeing is that we are seeing startups exhibit quite significant startup performance in particular markets that we all know about. But we also have to be mindful that there are remaining 50 countries across the continent that are yet to be able to activate a lot of their competitive advantages in order to make them host and home for innovation. And it's important to think about the remaining of those markets, because that's also the only way to make the continent as a whole a viable market for innovation across the coming years for startups in different industries. And the hope, I think that's what we're all working towards, would be to address the challenges that are now making it difficult for startups to scale across the continent. So how easy or difficult is it for a startup in e-commerce, for example, to scale from Nairobi, Kenya to Uganda, Kampala? And really figuring out what is the infrastructure that is needed to be able to scale sustainably this innovation boost. Because we have to remember that VC funding is not the only element needed in order to grow ecosystem. Of course, investment comes in as an ability to scale and accelerate the process, but there is a strong need of infrastructure, both from a regulatory perspective, as well as creating mobility within the continent to allow scalability and really to allow these companies to look at it as a sustainable and viable market for the next coming years.
Awesome. Thanks, Mariam. I think you touched on some really important points there around, not highlighting VC investment as a key contributor alone, but, the underlying success of these startups. And, you've mentioned infrastructure, you've touched on regulatory challenges. Maybe I'll ask Rio to highlight potentially some other challenges you've seen or you think there are for, African startups to kind of scale across the continent, and where we as ecosystem contributors can assist in that, whether it be, speaking to governments that we operate in, or collaborating more as investors, or providing more ecosystem support?
I guess there are two things apart from infrastructure. Maybe one is money. I don't want to sound stupid here, but still money is an issue. We see, like if you look back, we started investing in 2018. At that point, the gap was in seed stage. And that's also a reason why Capital Africa Ventures has been investing primarily in seed stage. Now it has changed. There are so many players trying to provide capital into seed stage. And also because we have seen a lot of exits or unicorns, there are so many later stage investors, especially outside from outside Africa. But if you look at maybe around Series A or Series B, there are not so many. You can actually count Africa-focused funds who can support that. So they still divide between maybe seed round, where local or Africa-focused funds can support companies incubate their ideas or maybe get off the ground. But for them to get to a stage where large checks can be invested, like ones from Tiger Global or SoftBank, they still gap. So I think there is, and then of course there are investors like TLCom, Protec who can fill that one, but still we can count them with both hands or even in a single hand, which is not still healthy. If it's in the US, obviously, in each stage, you have hundreds of VCs and you have choices. As long as you have a good performance in the business, you have choices. But in Africa, it's still not there. So I think we should still, promote maybe having more Africa-focused ones to go up so that they can invest into Series A or B so that they can pass it to growth stage. But also maybe facilitate investment from outside Africa to go down to A so that we can have a straight line from the beginning to the end. So that's one factor, I think. And another factor is talent. This is so getting so severe now, especially for engineers or maybe engineers, BD, these areas. It's quite difficult for you to find good talent, especially engineer, for you to get the right talent in Africa because of the maybe short history of the tech ecosystem itself. It's not easy to find an engineer with 10 years experience in Africa because the ecosystem doesn't exist for that long. And now, but at the same time now, because Series A or B companies in Africa are trying to scale, they obviously want to expand their engineering team. Sometimes they want to have an engineering hub in each country they expand to, but it costs a lot, especially you want to get a senior engineer. And now it seems like the cost that startups have to pay are kind of way more than the skills or the level of skills that you can expect from those people. So I think there should be a market adjustment over time, but that will become a bit of pain for companies to scale. Even in a portfolio companies now moving into Series A, they're obviously in a position to scale their operations. What could always become a bottleneck for them is talent acquisition.
Yeah, thanks, Ria. I think you've touched on an important point around some of the challenges these startups are facing. And I think, the talent point is probably not only an African thing. I think it's a global kind of problem that are experienced by portfolio companies, more so in African tech right now, given how much money there is and given how much, how many great African tech startups there are. So thanks for your input there. Maybe I'll reach out to Alberto here from a global investment perspective. Do you see the same kind of gap in terms of capital available for African tech startups and pretty much the kind of growth phase that Ria was talking about? And how do we get more African VCs or African focused funds to be investing at that stage? And maybe it's a point around how we get more LPs that are relevant in terms of looking at this kind of asset class in this geography. Maybe I'll open it up to you for some thoughts.
Awesome, thank you. So yeah, I think that Rio and Marem covered mostly everything. One of the things that maybe we didn't touch, and it's the in terms of access to capital, also access to private capital, but more in terms of big corporations and tech corporations working alongside with the startups. I think this is an important part that we see a lot of big corporations that they are as risk averse to start working with a company that can fail maybe in 2 years, or that they have like a lot of bureaucracy internally that makes really difficult for a big corporate like telco companies or even industrial companies to work with a startup. And that makes the sales cycles of the startups be a bit more, in the case of B2B startups, be a bit more slow, and it makes difficult for them to show traction, and it goes on and on. So that's one of the parts that I think that it can be like really good for the ecosystem to get. Then in terms of what Marine said, it's about scaling. This I'm 100% agree with you in terms of like if we want to scale the company in terms of retail, it's really difficult to do it when there's like a 17% only intra-trade inside the continent, while there's a lot of imports and export being effectuated at the same time. So if we grow the number of intra-trade in the continent, I think that it's easier for startups to scale, and it's easier for startups to show more traction and raise additional revenues. And in terms of attracting like more from the global perspective funds, in the case of Plug and Play, we don't have LPs, so I don't know how difficult it is. We work with our own balance sheet money and the CEO's family office. But yeah, I agree, like little by little, there's more interest in Africa. And I think that everything takes time. We cannot expect like from one day to another to have like millions and millions of dollars going into Africa. So I think it's just about time. We are seeing like some exits, we're seeing some big funding rounds, and it's just about time to see this materializing into more money going into the continent. So I think we need to be a bit patient in that sense. But I'm super positive because the numbers are showing that there's like a great future for the continent in general.
Yeah, thanks, Alberto. Some really great points there, and I think touching on the fact that we probably need to be a bit more patient, and that this won't happen overnight is an important point. Maybe just to shift gears a bit and kind of talk about what each of us or what each of you are experiencing as key trends that are happening in the African VC ecosystem right now, whether that be, large valuations, much shorter deal times, much larger round sizes. Yeah, it'd be great to get your insights in terms of things that you're experiencing in the ecosystem that are quite topical right now. Maria, maybe we can start with you.
I think as I'm going to reinforce a little bit some of what Alberto just mentioned, which is that we are seeing the ecosystem grow, and but that growth takes time. And I think it's one of my answers usually when we're questioned around what does the ecosystem on the continent need most in order to grow, and my answer tends to be time. It takes time to find ways to adapt technology and innovation to particular cultural environment and particular needs. And it will take time for the entrepreneurs to do that work. It will also take time for the investors to learn how to better support the entrepreneurs in that work. And it will take time for the remaining institutions such as governments and universities to figure out what their right place and support is in that chain. And we are seeing lately, obviously, a lot of excitement and, for example, motivation and engagement around fintech, because it's one of the industries where we're seeing the highest performance. And often it would be great for us to reflect upon why is fintech so successful in the continent at this stage. And when we look at really the foundation that laid this on the success of fintech, we realize that a really strong, important part of it has been the extensive development of telco corporates on the continent, which has really facilitated the growth and penetration of fintech solutions across different countries on the continent. And today, we even are often confused between, the telcos and the banks, who's doing what. And to me, that only also shows the importance of developing additional sectors, but also what are the right infrastructure, again, to build those sectors. We often talk about agri-tech as being something very important on the continent, e-commerce, e-logistics, but all of those different sectors are also developed based upon infrastructure. And we have to look at what are the ways in which we can support the growth of those industries. And as a general note, I would say that, of course, certain industries are very exciting because we've seen those business models already be successful in other emerging markets, like different models that we're seeing work in Latin America or in APAC, which are pretty much solving very similar issues to the continent as well. So we can pretty much bet on their capacity to succeed. And in that work, our ability to also continue understanding the differentiating factors of the continent is very important, because there are particular competitive advantages that the continent has. And as we are encouraging and investing in startups, our support should continue to highlight those competitive advantages, because then that's how we set them up for success. It's by understanding what are the competitive advantages of the markets that they want to be in, and therefore what are the particular sectors to support in there. I am not necessarily a big advocate of pushing for particular sectors, just because I think we are too early at the stage of the ecosystem development of the continent to make certain predictions about what are the industries that will for sure succeed. But I do really believe in highlighting competitive advantages and being able to push and boost startups to go in that direction, especially looking at the markets that they're evolving in. So when working very closely with a company in Nigeria, the way to approach the market should not be the same as approaching it in Ethiopia. And that has to be recognized at the level of the supporting infrastructures that we're putting in place to make sure that those companies are successful.
Yeah, I really agree with the points you've mentioned. Thanks, Miriam. You mentioned fintech being something that's been really successful as a sector in an African continent or specific countries, and you mentioned that that's a large result to the infrastructure that's been put in place that allows these startups in these sectors to succeed. Maybe Rio, I'd love to hear from you around what other sectors that you guys are finding quite interesting now from an African tech perspective, and maybe why now you feel that it's ripe for innovation and success. And perhaps also just to dive into another aspect that we talked about earlier, we're probably wrong to discuss Africa as a VC investment landscape or destination, as each country is very different and has very different stages of development. So it would also be good just to, from the rest of the panelists, hear about which specific geographic areas within Africa you're really interested in and seeing a lot of traction gain. Maybe we'll start with you, Ria.
Yeah, so maybe to talk about other factors that are standing out in addition to fintech. There are a couple, but we are particularly interested in logistics or supply chain and healthcare. And I think there's a pattern. Even if you look at other emerging markets, India, Southeastern Asia, which are maybe a few years ahead. If you look at the amount of this investment, Indonesia is like 3 to 4 years ahead of Africa. India basically like 10 years ahead. And if you look at the types of companies that emerged in those markets, fintech comes first. Maybe it's because of the necessity for people, like the underlying need is quite strong. And that's why it's kind of easier to build that business before jumping onto maybe B2C entertainment app, which needs those infrastructure to be able to work in the first place. So maybe even how startups or types of startups emerge have to follow a pattern where you have to start with the fundamentals and then you layer on different things on top of it. And so I think fintech comes first. And then now it's kind of time for other types of applications. And then we are interested in logistics, so B2B supply chain, which have a lot of successful cases in other markets. For example, B2B supply chain is getting hotter and hotter and hotter. Maybe fast movers, companies like Trigger or SockWatch, but now there are a lot of companies who are trying to follow them sometimes in the different geographies, in different verticals. For example, Kibano Top Up from Kenya / Nigeria, they're trying to serve restaurants. It's quite an exciting time, because if you look at the scale of those companies, they are now, some of them are getting closer to next unicorn. Their stage is more like Series A, B-ish. And then once they hit Series C, they're likely to get to unicorn status. Maybe even like logistics. We have Sandy, Kobo 360, Raleigh. Those guys are somewhere in the similar variation right now. So they're kind of ready to get to that unicorn stage where fintech companies have already achieved. And then because there's kind of clear path there, I mean, not clear path, but there's at least a pattern that companies in other markets have followed. For example, in the logistics sector, there are so many companies in India who have followed that path. And the B2B supply chain, there's a company called, I don't know the proper pronunciation, but Udan, a B2B supply chain company with like, I think their GMV is like 2 billion. So there's already a success case in India. And then, yeah, if you can capture multiple countries in Africa, it's theoretically entirely possible to achieve that kind of GMV and also that kind of variation. I think Udan's variation is right now is like 6 billion, 7 billion. So you can even surpass the unicorn status. So this sector where I think that these sectors that typically come after fundamental business model in fintech should be quite exciting. And we are always seeing that's happening. And healthcare is kind of same. Maybe healthcare will come a little bit later than logistics. Healthcare companies are majorly in Series A right now, but they will now proceed to Series B to C in the coming years. Like Helm Health is now in Series A, but I think they will come to Series B, C, Reliance HMO in Nigeria. So I'm pretty excited. Like these buckets of companies who are, waiting to become unicorns. There's a bunch of them, and then I think it comes in the order of like how fundamental they are as sectors.
Yeah, thanks, Ria. I share your passion for healthcare, supply chain, and logistics. That's kind of our key areas for investing as well. So hopefully we see some strong growth there. Alberto, I'd like to just extend the question to you. What are you seeing from a sector development interest perspective? And yeah, maybe you also just touch on from specific African countries, which ones do you see developing and attracting a bit more interest quicker than others? And yeah, thanks.
Awesome. Thank you for the question. So yeah, like in terms of areas, like I agree with all of you. Like most of our portfolio actually is fintech and logistics. So that's most of what we have done in Africa in general. Then in terms of regions, it's easy to see because we have Egypt, Nigeria, and Kenya and South Africa with massive populations, which is normal to attract like more VC funding when you have like these massive populations. And then we have like other regions that we are seeing that they are raising some funds, like Ghana, Senegal, or right now I'm based in Morocco at the moment, and I'm seeing like great things. But what we're seeing is in these big markets, they are already in a second generation of entrepreneurs, people that is exiting from the previous startups and starting their own startups. And what I'm seeing, for instance, in less developed markets, it's in terms of startup funding, it's a first generation of entrepreneurs that they are starting getting everything, and they want to be like the other ones. So in terms of regional, we're seeing right now the Francophone Africa area that is starting to get some interest, notably because of Wave last fundraising, but also because there's cool things being developed there. And that's the one that I'm seeing like that's most promising, aside from the main areas that we have in the continent. In terms of space, something that we haven't touched, like most of our investments are in logistics and fintech, but something that we haven't touched, and maybe it's really interesting, is DeFi and anything related to crypto technology. I think that at least in Plug and Play, we try to invest in early on in everything. And I think that there's a great opportunity in anything related to DeFi, and maybe we are seeing already like some success cases doing like remittances with the stable coins, so to avoid regulations and banking getting into and getting like massive commissions for any kind of transaction, but also even having like stable coins as a payment or as your job payment, and avoiding inflation from different currencies. So I think that there's really interesting space that should be developed in the continent, but this is something that is being done globally at the moment. But I think that it has a lot of applications in the continent, notably with stable coins and with generating like closed loops economies, thanks to the blockchain technology. So yeah, I would say that.
Thanks, Alberto. Yeah, some really interesting points there, and I agree. I think that the DeFi space is attracting a lot of interest, and it's a great opportunity to support some of the fintechs that are already operating in the continent and making them more efficient. So Maybe a point to raise that we've been struggling with and trying to understand from an African VC perspective is, what role is there for different types of forms of capital to make a conducive VC ecosystem? I think our market is probably slightly less developed than those internationally, and we're typically seeing mostly equity type capital available. But what is the opportunity for other forms of non-dilutive capital to support the growth of different types of business models on the African continent to help you further develop these businesses and not necessarily just get bucketed into Series C, Series A, and Series B, and there's in between to kind of help you get to that growth. Maybe Ria, I'll ask you because you're nodding your head there.
Yeah, meaning that I had some idea. So yeah, it's a good point. And debt capital is, I think it's going to be much needed in this market. So we have equity capital. I mean, of course, there's a lot of nuances in equity itself, but I will let other panelists talk about it. And that is needed. And I guess there are a couple of elements that you can craft debt products for. One is working capital. There are companies like even B2B supply chain companies, they need a lot of working capital. And then if they run it for a year or two, you see it, you see the economics, and then you see at least that the company can turn around the capital requirement. And with that, you can craft an instrument to give them a capital. But it's like right now, there's no like standardized process or product out there. Companies will have to talk with different players, on a case-by-case basis. But if you can kind of aggregate those demands from companies who would need working capital, then I think you'd make a good, maybe even a business case, like maybe building a debt fund. Same can be applied for own lending capital. There are several lending companies that are coming up in the continent. And one of the key success factors for them is actually whether they can access capital or not. And then ironically, some of the successful companies for doing lending have access capital from outside Africa, like hedge funds, investment banks. Why wouldn't Africa-focused funders provide that and capture that opportunity? Like it's kind of, it should happen within Africa, right? So I think those are the areas that we can kind of think about how we can do it, and I think it's going to happen soon. So yeah, that's my take on other types of capital.
Yeah, thanks, Rio. I think we're probably running out of time. We could be chatting for a much longer period of time, but maybe I'd like to try and get some closing remarks here. And I think a great question to kind of close off this panel is just what is really making you excited to be part of the African VC ecosystem right now? Maybe Alberto, I'll start with you.
Thank you. So I think it's clear there's a lot of things to build, and like it's a continent that there's a lot of things to build, and that it has a huge impact. Anything that you build here has a huge impact, and you don't need to be like let's say impact investors only by being in venture capital. You're impacting because you're creating thousands of jobs. You're creating like the different kind of approaches that can make like people get or jobs or like easy life or a more quality of living. So I think that's one of the most exciting parts is like investing in venture capital. It's actually having a direct impact on the different populations that you're investing. Also that it's an emerging country with a huge, massive population that is going to be like basically the future of the population is going to be mostly in Africa. So I think that it's important to develop the country where they are, so the economy keeps growing, and we see like kind of like close. There's not like this inequality gap for the future, and yeah, basically that. I think the most exciting part is that there's a lot of stuff to build, a lot of things to have impact on, and being in this space at this moment, it's great to have like a direct impact on that, and seeing it year by year, the impact is what makes it more exciting.
Yeah, thanks, Alberto. I share your sentiments there. Miriam, maybe some final thoughts from your side.
I think very similarly to what Alberto mentioned, obviously the continents are very exciting, both an exciting perspective and an exciting reality as of today as we're speaking. But also I think what makes me even more excited is that there is and there has always been an entrepreneurial culture on the continent. It's not something new, and it's not something that we're not teaching them entrepreneurship. We are trying to allow them to enhance something that has already been a primarily part of their culture and part of their way of doing things. And I think about, for instance, Senegal, where I'm from, where a majority of individuals that I know of and that I live with are people who are entrepreneurs. They may not be tech startup entrepreneurs in the way that we're thinking about it, but they are entrepreneurs in the way that they think about creative ways to create value, and for that value to allow them to have a sustainable life. And so it makes me very excited to be able to be part of bringing the opportunities that those already born to be entrepreneurs need in order to utilize technology to solve existing issues. And I think that that is also what makes a lot of different investors be so interested on the continent, because we're also seeing entrepreneurs who are looking at solving real issues. They're looking at solving issues that the continent has been struggling with for quite some time. And we are at the dawn of what could be going from becoming and being consumers of innovation to actually being creators and producers of innovation. And I think that motivates quite a lot of different individuals in being able to help in that transformation, and also in being able to humbly support it, as we're not coming to teach anything, we're only coming to enhance things that already exist.
Some really great points. I love the creators of innovation. Rio, maybe some closing thoughts on your side, and what's really making you excited about investing into Africa.
So to me, to be in the African ecosystem at this time, at this right moment, is back to the future. I'm using analogies of other markets sometimes in the discussion. So India is a great example for like precedent for Africa. And right now we see decacorns emerging every day, like not every day, but every year. And then every month they have multiple unicorns. That's not happening in Africa yet. It's gonna come. And Sequoia went to India to start their investing back in 2008. And I said, India is about 10 years ahead of us. So it's more like where we are standing here is like 2010 India, where there are not so many investors, but some of the investors are aware of the opportunity. And now we know what has happened. And we are going through it. We are going to live through that big bang of a great ecosystem. And then because Africa is the last frontier, if you miss it, you will never going to see it. So I'm pretty humble and honored to be part of this ecosystem, to see the birth of one of the world's greatest innovation ecosystem to emerge. So that's that's my take.
Thank you so much, Rio. And with that, we probably wrap up the panel discussion. Thank you, Alberto. Thank you, Marem. Thank you, Rio, for joining this panel discussion. And I look forward to chatting more about these issues when we meet in person.